The world of desktop operating systems has always been dominated by a familiar face: Windows. For decades, Microsoft has maintained an almost unshakable hold on the desktop market. Its brand recognition, pre-installed dominance, and extensive software ecosystem have made it the default choice for billions of users worldwide. Yet, lurking in the background, quietly but steadily, is an alternative that has never truly vanished, and for some, never really lost appeal: Linux. Once considered the playground of programmers, tech enthusiasts, and server administrators, Linux has slowly been pushing its way into the mainstream conversation about desktop computing. And now, in 2025, the question that keeps getting louder is, can Linux finally beat Windows on the desktop? Could we be on the cusp of a shift that reshapes how billions of people interact with their computers every day? To answer this question, we need to consider a variety of factors that influence the desktop operating system landscape. Market share is often the first metric people think about. As of the early 2020s, Windows continues to command a dominant position, holding around 70 to 75% of desktop OS usage. Mac OS has carved out a comfortable second place, hovering around 15%, while Linux distributions collectively make up the remaining fraction, usually cited between 2 and 3%. At first glance, these numbers suggest a gap that is virtually insurmountable. Windows has the advantage of decades of software compatibility, deep enterprise integration, and a brand identity that is practically synonymous with personal computing. However, statistics alone don't tell the full story. Market share measures past and present dominance, not future potential. The real question is whether Linux has evolved enough, in terms of usability, software ecosystem, and hardware compatibility, to challenge Windows in a meaningful way. The evolution of Linux on the desktop over the past decade has been remarkable. Early desktop Linux environments were criticized for being inaccessible, confusing, and requiring extensive command line knowledge. Installing drivers, configuring hardware, or even installing software could be an ordeal for an average user. Fast forward to 2025, and the story is very different. Modern distributions like Ubuntu, Fedora, Pop_OS, Linux Mint, and even more specialized options like Elementary OS have prioritized user experience in ways that rival commercial operating systems. Graphical software centers have replaced tedious package installations, system updates are smooth and often automatic, and hardware compatibility has improved dramatically. Even gaming, once considered a niche and largely unsupported on Linux, has seen a revolution. Tools like Proton and Steam Deck's Linux-based SteamOS have made running Windows games on Linux surprisingly feasible, and in some cases, even more performant than on Windows itself. Another critical factor in the OS war is software availability. Windows dominance has historically been bolstered by a vast library of commercial and enterprise software. Photoshop, Microsoft Office, AutoCAD, countless proprietary tools. Many of these programs have been exclusive to Windows, giving Microsoft a massive lock-in advantage. Linux has always countered this with open-source alternatives, but the challenge has been convincing users that tools like LibreOffice, GIMP, or Blender could fully replace industry standards. In 2025, however, the landscape is shifting. Many companies are increasingly adopting cross-platform web-based applications, and virtualization or container solutions allow Windows applications to run on Linux seamlessly. The cloud has become a great equalizer. Office suites, creative tools, and even development environments are moving to the browser or cloud-native applications, reducing Windows' once impenetrable advantage in software availability. We also need to consider the role of privacy, security, and control in this OS war. Windows, despite decades of refinement, is often criticized for its telemetry, forced updates, and extensive integration with Microsoft's online services. For users concerned about digital privacy, this is a significant drawback. Linux, by contrast, has a culture of transparency. Source code is open for inspection, updates are user-controlled, and telemetry is minimal or optional. In 2025, with privacy concerns rising globally and users becoming more aware of their digital footprint, this advantage is more compelling than ever. Enterprises, developers, and even casual users increasingly value an OS that doesn't spy on them or force them into a corporate ecosystem. Hardware compatibility is another domain where Linux has historically lagged behind Windows. Graphics cards, printers, and specialized peripherals often required fiddly configuration and driver installations. In 2025, though, this gap has narrowed considerably. Thanks to better community support, corporate backing from companies like Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA, and the rise of Linux-friendly devices. Installing Linux has become a plug-and-play experience in many cases. Even laptops designed specifically for Linux, like those from System 76 or Purism, offer a smooth experience out of the box. As more OEMs begin to ship Linux pre-installed, the friction for users moving from Windows is diminishing. Yet, despite all these advancements, Windows still maintains its strengths. Enterprise adoption is deep and wide. Most businesses rely heavily on Windows-based infrastructure, including Active Directory, Microsoft Exchange, and countless proprietary enterprise applications. This ecosystem is hard to replicate on Linux. For corporate IT departments, switching to Linux would require retraining staff, rewriting workflows, and potentially purchasing new solutions to replace legacy software. In other words, Linux desktop ambitions face not just technical challenges, but organizational and cultural ones. The gaming sector is an interesting battleground. For years, Windows' advantage was clear. DirectX, broad GPU driver support, and an enormous library of games meant that gamers simply didn't have a reason to switch. But in 2025, Linux has made substantial inroads. SteamOS based on Linux powers Valve's Steam Deck, which has proven that a Linux-based gaming system can deliver a high-quality experience. Compatibility layers like Proton allow thousands of Windows games to run with minimal effort, and companies like Epic Games are beginning to experiment with Linux support for certain titles. While Linux still hasn't fully overtaken Windows in gaming, the gap is narrowing. For a younger generation of gamers willing to embrace Linux, the platform has become not just viable, but competitive. Community and support networks are another decisive factor in this OS war. Windows users benefit from decades of documentation, tutorials, forums, and enterprise support options. Linux has always had a strong community of enthusiasts, but historically this support was scattered and inconsistent. Today, in 2025, Linux communities have matured, offering polished documentation, structured tutorials, and professional support options from companies like Red Hat, Canonical, and System 76. This makes the transition to Linux less intimidating for everyday users. Furthermore, the rise of YouTube, forums, and social media has made finding help quicker and more intuitive. But what about the general user experience? Here, opinions vary widely. Linux desktops now offer polished, visually appealing interfaces that can rival Mac OS or Windows. GNOME, KDE Plasma, and other environments are highly customizable, performant, and accessible. System performance is often superior, particularly on older hardware, which can give Linux an edge for users who want a fast, efficient OS. The challenge remains in standardization. Unlike Windows, where every installation is roughly the same, Linux offers many flavors, which can overwhelm newcomers. Distributions must balance choice with simplicity, and in 2025, some have done this exceptionally well, particularly Ubuntu, Linux, Mint, and Pop_O. Security is another domain where Linux shines. Windows remains a target for malware and ransomware due to its ubiquity. Linux, while not immune, benefits from a smaller attack surface and a culture of proactive security. Built-in package managers, sandboxing, and strict permission models mean that viruses are far less common. In an era where cyber threats are increasingly sophisticated, this advantage cannot be overstated. Both individuals and organizations increasingly recognize that security matters, and for many, Linux offers peace of mind that Windows simply cannot match. The rise of cloud computing and virtualization also plays into Linux hands. Many workflows now rely less on the underlying OS and more on cloud-hosted applications. This reduces the friction of OS switching. Developers, in particular, are gravitating toward Linux because it offers native compatibility with cloud environments, containers, and development tools like Docker, Kubernetes, and Python. The advantage Windows once had as the default development environment is eroding, particularly for web and cloud-centric work. At the same time, there are obstacles that Linux still faces. Hardware vendors still prioritize Windows, drivers, and updates. Some commercial software remains unavailable, and the cultural momentum of Windows is hard to break. Many users are simply accustomed to the Windows ecosystem, and change requires motivation. Linux must not only match Windows in technical terms, but also persuade users to invest time in learning a new system. Yet, despite these hurdles, the trajectory is clear. Linux is no longer a fringe player. Its technical maturity, focus on privacy and security, growing software compatibility, and polished user experience position it as a genuine contender in the desktop space. The question is no longer whether Linux can function as a desktop OS. It clearly can, but whether it can convince enough users to make the switch to seriously challenge Windows dominance. The next few years will be crucial. If Linux continues to improve gaming support, simplify the installation process, expand commercial software availability, and convince OEMs to ship devices with Linux pre-installed, its growth could accelerate dramatically. Conversely, Windows is unlikely to remain static. Microsoft continues to innovate with Windows 12 and beyond, emphasizing cloud integration, AI features, and ecosystem lock-in. The competition between the two platforms is not just about technology. It is about philosophy, trust, and user choice. In conclusion, can Linux finally beat Windows in 2025? The answer is complicated. Technically, Linux is more capable than ever, and in some areas, such as privacy, security, and efficiency on older hardware, it arguably surpasses Windows. Adoption is slowly increasing, and certain niches, developers, privacy-conscious users, gamers willing to experiment, are leading the charge. But Windows' deep-rooted ecosystem, enterprise dominance, and familiarity make it a formidable opponent. The desktop OS war is far from over, and 2025 may be remembered as the year when Linux emerged as a serious contender, rather than a niche curiosity. Whether it overtakes Windows in market share or not, the real victory for Linux is that it is now a credible choice for millions of users who demand control, privacy, and freedom on their desktops.